Hello, friends, and those curious about the deepest personalities in history. Today, we will focus on the life of Jesus of Nazareth, touched by love, compassion, and sacrifice. His life was shaped by a great spiritual quest, from his humble beginnings in Bethlehem to the trials in the deserts of Jericho. On this journey from carpentry to the hearts of kings and the poor, we hear the echoes of the Sermon on the Mount and feel the healing touch. I wonder what affects you most when you think about Jesus' life. Let's meet in the comments. Long ago, in the days when the Roman Empire stretched across vast lands, a decree was issued. Every family was to return to their ancestral town for a census. And so Joseph, a humble carpenter from Nazareth, set out on the long road south. Beside him was Mary, his wife, carrying within her the child promised by an angel. The roads were crowded with travelers. Donkeys carried bundles, carts rolled over stones, children clung to their mothers. Dust rose in the air as countless footsteps made their way toward their ancestral towns. For Mary and Joseph, the journey was not easy. The sun by day was warm, and the nights grew cool beneath the starlit sky. They paused often for Mary to rest. In hushed tones, Joseph reassured her, "We will arrive soon. The Lord will provide." At last, the lights of Bethlehem appeared on the horizon, a small town nestled among the Judean hills. Yet when they arrived, every inn was full. Doors opened only to close again with apologetic words. No room tonight. Finally, an innkeeper, seeing Mary's condition, offered a stable, a simple shelter meant for animals. And there, in the quiet of night, with only Joseph by her side, Mary gave birth to her son. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. Around them the animals stirred softly, the warm breath of oxen, the quiet rustle of hay. Outside the night was still, the sky vast and clear. Far away in the fields, shepherds kept watch over their flocks. Suddenly the night broke with light. An angel appeared, and the shepherds trembled in fear. But the angel spoke gently, "Do not be afraid. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, who is Christ the Lord." And with that, the heavens were filled with a multitude of voices praising, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." The shepherds hurried into Bethlehem. They found Mary, Joseph, and the child lying in the manger. They knelt in awe, whispering to one another, "Could this truly be the Messiah we have long awaited?" Meanwhile, in lands far to the east, wise men studied the night sky. They had seen a new star appear brighter than the rest, and they knew it signaled the birth of someone great. With gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they began their long journey westward. Back in Bethlehem, the town slept on, unaware of the quiet miracle that had just occurred. In the stable, the newborn rested peacefully, and Mary, though weary, gazed upon him with love. Joseph sat nearby, silent, protective, thoughtful. And thus the story of Jesus began in simplicity, in humility, in peace. After the birth in Bethlehem, danger soon followed. King Herod, troubled by rumors of a newborn king of the Jews, sent soldiers to search for the child. But warned in a dream, Joseph gathered Mary and the infant Jesus. In the stillness of night, they departed swiftly, making their way to Egypt. The journey was long and uncertain. Through deserts and across distant lands, they sought refuge. In Egypt, among foreign tongues and customs, the little family found safety until the danger had passed. Years later, after Herod's death, Joseph was again guided in a dream. The family returned not to Bethlehem, but to the quiet village of Nazareth in Galilee. There Jesus grew in wisdom and strength, surrounded by hills, olive groves, and the rhythms of village life. In Nazareth, daily life was simple yet demanding. At dawn, the roosters crowed. Children fetched water from wells. Women baked bread over clay ovens, their voices rising in morning greetings. Men worked in the fields, all like Joseph at their crafts. Jesus, as a boy, likely followed Joseph to the carpenter's workshop. The smell of fresh wood, the sound of saws and hammers, the careful smoothing of beams. These became familiar parts of his youth. But beyond the ordinary tasks, there was something extraordinary about him. Neighbors whispered, "This child, he listens differently. He speaks with a wisdom beyond his years." When Jesus was 12, his family traveled to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. The city, alive with pilgrims, bustled with merchants, priests, and travelers from many lands. The temple stood magnificent, gleaming in the sunlight, its courtyards filled with worshippers. After the festival, the family began the journey home. But unknown to Mary and Joseph, Jesus stayed behind. For a day they traveled, thinking he was with relatives in the caravan. When they discovered he was missing, fear filled their hearts. For 3 days they searched the city, their footsteps echoing in the narrow streets, their eyes scanning every corner. At last they found him in the temple, seated among the teachers. The elders leaned in close as the boy spoke. His questions were sharp, his understanding deep. One teacher whispered to another, "How can one so young speak with such clarity, such wisdom?" Mary, filled with both relief and frustration, said, "Son, why have you treated us so? Your father and I have been searching for you in sorrow." And Jesus answered softly, "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" They did not fully understand his words, but Mary kept them in her heart, pondering their meaning. The family returned to Nazareth, where Jesus grew quietly into manhood. He worked, prayed, learned, and lived in harmony with his people. Though his public ministry had not yet begun, those around him sensed that his life carried a deeper purpose. Even in his youth, the story was unfolding. Slowly, gently, like a seed planted deep in fertile soil, the morning sun rose over the hills of Galilee, golden light spilling across stone houses and olive trees. In the village streets, children carried baskets of bread, women drew water from the wells, and men prepared tools for their work. Yet on that day, the normal rhythm slowed. A quiet anticipation lingered, for word had reached them. The teacher was near. Fishermen along the shore of the Sea of Galilee set aside their nets, whispering among themselves. "Did you hear?" One asked. "They say he touched a man who could not walk, and now he runs." Another nodded, eyes wide. If such things are true, then surely this is no ordinary man. As Jesus walked with his disciples, the air itself seemed to shift. He did not stride with the arrogance of kings or the weight of soldiers, but with the calm assurance of one who carried truth itself. Villagers stepped aside in reverence, some bowing their heads, others pressing forward to see his face more clearly. Mothers carried their little ones forward, placing them near him, and with the gentlest touch, he would rest his hand upon their heads, blessing them with words soft yet eternal. By the fires at night, servants whispered the stories. They say the teacher spoke of a kingdom, but not of stone walls or golden thrones. What kind of kingdom, then? Another asked in hushed curiosity. One of the heart, a kingdom that begins within. And so the stories grew. Travelers who had come for trade left carrying something far more valuable than goods. They carried testimonies. In Jerusalem, in Jericho, in small villages nestled between hills, strangers began to share the same name, Jesus of Nazareth. His disciples, though still learning, began to see the shape of his mission. They watched as he listened patiently to the poorest of the poor, as he ate with tax collectors and spoke kindly to those others despised. The world was beginning to tilt, and they knew it. The road south stretched long beneath the sun. Dust clung to sandals, rising in faint clouds with every step. The disciples walked with Jesus, their hearts restless, for they sensed the journey carried a weight beyond ordinary travel. Villages lay scattered along the way. Simple stone homes clustered near wells, children running barefoot through fields, shepherds guiding their flocks toward pasture. Yet everywhere they went, word of the teacher had already arrived before him. People gathered by the roadside, eager to catch even a glimpse. One afternoon near Jericho, a cry rang out above the noise of the crowd. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. A blind man sat by the road, his voice breaking with desperation. Some scolded him, telling him to be silent, but he cried out even louder, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped. The crowd hushed. Slowly, he walked toward the man. What do you want me to do for you? He asked gently. Lord, I want to see. And in a moment, sight flooded his eyes. He blinked, gasped, and fell to his knees, weeping with joy. The people erupted in astonishment, their whispers rising like waves. I knew the stories were true. Did you see? He healed him with only words. From that moment, the healed man followed them on the road, his voice lifting in praise, telling everyone what had been done. At night, when the journey slowed, the disciples gathered by the fire. The flicker of flames lit their faces, their eyes reflecting both hope and confusion. Surely, Peter whispered, he will enter Jerusalem in triumph. The people will make him king. Yes, another agreed. He has the power to overthrow Rome itself. But Jesus sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the city ahead, his face calm yet shadowed by sorrow. Nearby, a servant who tended to the fire overheard their words. He turned to another and murmured, "Why does the teacher look upon Jerusalem with both love and grief?" And none could answer. The days passed, the journey continuing. Crowds swelled with every village they entered. Some came for healing, some for teaching, and others simply to see the man whose name had spread like fire across the land. Mothers lifted their children toward him, asking for blessings. The sick were carried on mats, their eyes filled with desperate hope. And though the road was long, Jesus did not turn them away. With each touch, each word, lives were changed and the stories multiplied. One evening, as the disciples walked ahead, Jesus paused upon a rise. The city of Jerusalem shimmered faintly in the distance, its walls catching the light of the setting sun. He stood still, his breath heavy. The disciples turned back to look at him, waiting and with a voice thick with sorrow. He whispered, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I have longed to gather your children as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing." The words fell heavy, like stones upon their hearts. The servants traveling with the caravan exchanged troubled glances. One whispered to another, "He speaks not as a conqueror, but as one whose heart is breaking." And so the journey pressed on, each step toward Jerusalem, carrying not only the weight of miles, but the weight of destiny itself. The air grew tense as Jesus and his disciples continued their journey. Each town, each village felt different now. Some looked upon him with awe, whispering, "This is the prophet. This must be the one we've waited for." Others looked with suspicion or even open hostility. The Pharisees followed closely, questioning every word, waiting for a misstep. Still Jesus pressed forward, his voice calm, his steps steady, his heart fixed on the path ahead. The healing of the 10 lepers. On the border between Galilee and Samaria, a group of 10 men stood far off, their bodies disfigured by leprosy. They cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Jesus looked at them with compassion and told them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." As they went, their skin was made whole again. The disease vanished. But only one, a Samaritan, turned back. He fell at Jesus' feet, praising God in a loud voice. Jesus asked softly, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? The disciples watched in silence. This moment lingered, a lesson of gratitude, a reminder that faith was not bound by nation or title, but by the heart. The teachings along the road. At night, when they rested, Jesus spoke in parables. His words hung in the air, carried by the firelight. He spoke of a widow who came again and again before a judge, pleading for justice. The judge finally gave in, not from righteousness, but because of her persistence. Jesus explained, "If even an unjust judge will grant justice, how much more will your Father in heaven respond to his children who cry out day and night?" He told of 2 men who went to pray, one a Pharisee, proud and boastful, the other a tax collector, broken and repentant. The tax collector, Jesus said, was the one who went home justified. The disciples sat close, listening carefully. These stories pierced them, humbling them, shaping them. The rich young ruler. Not long after, a wealthy young man approached. His robe was fine, his hands unstained by labor. He knelt before Jesus and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus looked at him and answered, "You know the commandments. Do not murder. Do not steal. Honor your father and mother. The young man nodded eagerly. All these I have kept since my youth. Jesus' eyes softened. One thing you lack. Sell all you have. Give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. The man's face fell. He turned away, sorrowful, for he was very rich. The disciples shifted uneasily. Jesus said, "How hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the wealthy to enter." They asked, "Then who can be saved?" Jesus replied, "With man, this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Prediction of his death again. As the journey continued, Jesus spoke to the 12 privately. "We are going up to Jerusalem. Everything written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. He will be handed over, mocked, insulted, and killed. But on the third day he will rise again." The disciples exchanged troubled glances they could not fully understand. Yet a shadow of fear hung over them. The Waltered to Turkish Pinkham, approaching to Nico. The crowd swelled. A blind man cried out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The people tried to silence him, but he shouted louder. Jesus stopped, called the man forward, and asked, What do you want me to do for you?" The man answered, "Lord, I want to see." Jesus said simply, "Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you." And immediately he could see. The crowd gasped, some praising God, others whispering uneasily. That night, as the disciples set camp outside Jericho, the air was heavy with expectation. The city of Jerusalem loomed closer with each step, and with it an unknown fate. Some disciples whispered by the fire, wondering if the kingdom would appear soon, wondering if triumph was near. But Jesus sat apart, his eyes reflecting the flames. He knew the road ahead, not of earthly victory, but of sacrifice. The quiet stretched deep into the night. The journey was not yet over. The road to Jerusalem narrowed as the city came into view. Stone walls stretched high against the sky, and pilgrims from across the land poured in for the great feast of Passover. The air was alive with tension. Voices, footsteps, and the quiet hum of expectation. The triumphal entry. As they approached the Mount of Olives, Jesus paused. He turned to 2 of his disciples and said, "Go into the village ahead. There you will find a donkey tied with a colt beside her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone asks, say, 'The Lord has need of them.'" The disciples did as told. When they returned, the crowd began to gather. They laid their cloaks on the donkey, and Jesus mounted it. As he entered the city, voices rose. "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Palm branches waved. Cloaks were spread along the road. Children shouted with joy, but not all rejoiced. From the temple steps, the Pharisees watched, their faces dark. One of them called out, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Jesus answered calmly, "I tell you the truth, if they keep silent, the stones themselves will cry out." The city shook with his arrival, yet in his eyes there was no triumph, only sorrow. As he looked upon Jerusalem, he wept. "If only you had known the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Cleansing the temple. The next day Jesus entered the temple courts. Their merchants shouted prices. Coins clattered. Doves fluttered in cages. The sacred space had become a marketplace. Jesus' voice thundered. It is written, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." He overturned the tables. Coins scattered across the floor. Doves were released into the sky. The merchants fled in fear. But the blind and the lame came to him, and he healed them. Children continued to cry out, "Hosanna to the Son of David." The chief priests grew furious. Their hatred hardened. The last teachings in the temple. Day after day, Jesus taught in the temple. He told parables of the wicked tenants of the wedding banquet, where many were invited, but few were chosen. He warned the Pharisees of their hypocrisy. You clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed. You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones. The people listened in awe. Yet the leaders plotted in secret, the widow's offering. One afternoon, Jesus sat watching the temple treasury. The wealthy came dropping heavy coins with pride. But then a poor widow slipped forward and placed 2 tiny copper coins. Jesus called his disciples. "Truly, I tell you, this widow has given more than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, gave all she had to live on." The lesson lingered in their hearts, prediction of the temple's fall. As they left the temple, one disciple marveled, "Teacher, look at these stones, these magnificent buildings." Jesus replied, "Do you see these great stones? Not one will be left upon another. Everyone will be thrown down." Later, on the Mount of Olives, they asked privately, "When will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming?" Jesus spoke of wars, earthquakes, false prophets, and tribulation. But he also promised, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." The night deepened with his prophecy, heavy yet filled with hope. The plot to kill him. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders gathered. Their whispers filled the chamber. Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. But Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, slipped quietly into their council. His eyes restless, his heart divided. "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" he asked. They weighed out 30 pieces of silver. From that moment, Judas looked for an opportunity. As the city slept, Jesus and his disciples prepared for the Passover meal. The streets grew still, but unseen forces stirred in the dark. Betrayal, sacrifice, destiny. The hour was drawing near. The streets of Jerusalem were alive with preparation. Families gathered for the feast of Passover, lamps flickering in every home. But in an upper room, away from the noise, Jesus and his disciples made ready for a night unlike any other. The table was set with bread and wine. The disciples reclined, weary from the long days, yet uncertain of what was to come. Jesus looked upon them, each face familiar, each heart known to him. As they began to eat, he spoke with a heaviness in his voice. "One of you will betray me." The room fell silent. The disciples looked at one another in shock. "Lord, is it I?" One asked. "Surely not I," another whispered. Jesus dipped bread into the dish and handed it to Judas. Their eyes met. Judas forced a smile, but inside his heart was restless. Jesus said softly, "What you are about to do, do quickly." And Judas slipped out into the night. The air felt colder after he left. Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it. "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He lifted the cup of wine. "This cup is the new covenant in my blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins." The disciples drank, their hearts stirred, though they did not yet understand. After the meal, Jesus rose, removed his outer garment, and tied a towel around his waist. He poured water into a basin and knelt before each disciple, washing their feet. The room was filled with awe and discomfort. When he came to Peter, Peter shook his head. "Lord, you shall never wash my feet." Jesus looked at him gently. "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Peter's eyes burned. "Then not just my feet, but my hands and head." As well, Jesus smiled faintly. "The one who was bathed does not need to wash except for his feet. You are clean." When he finished, he sat again and said, "I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done for you. By this all will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." After singing a hymn, they left the city and walked toward the Mount of Olives. The night was quiet, the stars above clear, but within Jesus, the weight of the world pressed heavily. In the garden called Gethsemane, he told his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." Taking Peter, James, and John, he went a little farther. His face grew sorrowful. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He fell to the ground praying, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." His sweat fell like drops of blood. He returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you not keep watch for 1 hour?" he asked softly. Again he prayed, and again he found them asleep. The third time he rose and said, "The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. My betrayer is at hand." And there through the darkness torches approached. Soldiers and officials, led by Judas. Judas came near and greeted him with a kiss. "Rabbi," he said. Jesus looked into his eyes. "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" The soldiers stepped forward, seizing him. Peter, in a burst of anger, drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword away," Jesus commanded. He touched the man's ear and healed him. The disciples scattered into the night, fear overtaking them. And Jesus, bound, was led away toward the house of the high priest. The night had only just begun. The torches flicker against the night sky, their glow casting long shadows across the stone streets of Jerusalem. The air is heavy, carrying the smell of dust and smoke. The soldiers march Jesus through narrow passageways, their armor clattering faintly. Some whisper, others spit words of mockery. Yet Jesus remains silent, his steps steady, his face resolute. They lead him to the house of the high priest. Within its courtyard, lamps are lit, their flames swaying in the wind. The Sanhedrin has been hastily gathered. Scribes, elders, chief priests, all summoned in the dead of night. Their robes rustle as they take their places, their eyes burning with accusation. The air in the chamber is tense. Whispers echo as men step forward to give their testimony, yet their words stumble. They contradict one another. The accusations crumble under their own weight. A lie cannot hold itself upright. Still, the leaders press on. At last the high priest himself rises. His voice is sharp, cutting through the murmurs. Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men bring against you? But Jesus remains silent. The silence stretches long, heavier than words. It unsettles them. The high priest, frustrated, leans closer, his voice rising. I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. At last, Jesus speaks. His voice is calm, but every syllable strikes like thunder in their hearts. I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. A gasp rushes through the hall. The high priest tears his garments in outrage. You have heard the blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? One after another they shout their judgment. He is guilty. He deserves death. Then the mockery begins. They blindfold him. One strikes him across the face. Prophesy, Messiah. Who struck you? Dej. Another spits upon him. Another slaps him again. The Son of God, clothed in eternal glory, now endures humiliation in silence. Meanwhile, outside in the courtyard, Peter lingers by the fire. The cold bites his skin. The flames flicker on his troubled face. He tries to blend into the crowd, but unease is written across him. A servant girl approaches. Her eyes narrow in recognition. You also were with Jesus of Galilee. Peter shifts uneasily, shakes his head quickly. I do not know what you were talking about. He moves away toward the gateway, but another servant notices him. This man was with him again. Peter denies it, his voice harder this time, edged with fear. I do not know the man. Time passes. The night grows darker. A third voice rises from the crowd. Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Peter's heart races. Desperation surges through him. He begins to call down curses, swearing, I do not know the man. And then the rooster crows. The sound pierces the night, sharp and undeniable. In that instant, Peter remembers the words of Jesus. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. Peter's breath catches. His chest tightens. Tears well in his eyes. He stumbles into the shadows, away from the fire, away from the eyes of the crowd. His body trembles, and he weeps bitterly, crushed by the weight of his failure. Inside, Jesus stands steady even as the blows fall. Outside, Peter collapses under the weight of fear. 2 trials unfold, one of divine faithfulness, one of human weakness, and the night presses on. The courtyard of the high priest had barely emptied when the chief priests and elders, led Jesus away in the cold grey light of morning. The streets of Jerusalem stirred with whispers, some out of curiosity, some out of fear. The air was heavy, not only with the scent of dust and smoke from cooking fires, but with a tension that clung to every corner. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, sat in judgment at the Taurium. His hall was a place of stone and echo, a seat of Roman authority built to intimidate. He was not unfamiliar with uprisings, with zealots, with the fragile balance of power in Judea. Yet, when the leaders of Israel pushed a bound, calm man before him, Pilate sensed something unusual. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked, his tone sharp, his Roman accent cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Jesus stood silent for a moment, eyes steady, neither fearful nor defensive. His face bore the wear of the long night, the blows, the spit, the mockery. Yet his silence carried more weight than the shouts of the mob outside. "You say so," he answered at last. His words were few, but they pressed against the air with unshakable calm. The chief priests erupted, voices rising, accusations spilling over one another. He stirs up the people. He claims to be a king. He threatens the peace of Caesar's empire. Pilate raised a hand to silence them. He studied Jesus as if searching for guilt in his eyes. But what he saw unsettled him. Not rebellion, not pride, but a quiet authority that seemed to look through him. Inside the hall, Pilate's wife approached, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Have nothing to do with this righteous man," she whispered urgently, "for I have suffered much in a dream because of him." Pilate hesitated. Rome was a machine of law and order, but even governors listened when omens struck fear. He stepped outside to the crowd gathered in the courtyard, voices swelling like the tide. "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people." Pilate declared, "I have examined him before you, and I find no guilt in him." A murmur spread. Disbelief among the leaders, surprise among the bystanders. But the priests pressed harder, their voices sharpened with rage. He stirs the people with his teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. At the mention of Galilee, Pilate seized an escape. Galilee belonged to Herod's jurisdiction. Let Herod deal with him. Pilate sent Jesus away, hoping to wash his hands of the matter. But Herod, curious more than concerned, mocked Jesus, draped him in a robe, and sent him back with disdain. Jesus, silent as before, endured it without protest. Pilate's plan had failed. Jesus stood once more in the Roman hall, and the crowd outside had grown louder, their chants swelling like a storm. "What shall I do with this man you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they roared, voices unrelenting. "Why? What evil has he done?" Pilate pleaded, his voice tinged with frustration. He was a governor caught between justice and the weight of politics, between what he saw in Jesus and the demands of the mob. Yet the cries only grew, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate looked to the basin of water set before him. He washed his hands, his face grim as though cleansing himself of a decision that no water could truly wash away. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "See to it yourselves." And yet, in yielding to their voices, he condemned him. The soldiers led Jesus away, preparing for the scourging that would precede the cross. The courtyard emptied into silence, the echoes of the mob fading into the distance. Pilate remained. The image of Jesus' steady gaze burned into his memory. A man condemned, yet strangely unbroken. The courtyard of the high priest had barely emptied when the chief priests and elders led Jesus away in the cold grey light of morning. The streets of Jerusalem stirred with whispers, some out of curiosity, some out of fear. The air was heavy, not only with the scent of dust and smoke from cooking fires, but with a tension that clung to every corner. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, sat in judgment at the Taurium. His hall was a place of stone and echo, a seat of Roman authority built to intimidate. He was not unfamiliar with uprisings, with zealots, with the fragile balance of power in Judea. Yet when the leaders of Israel pushed a bound, calm man before him, Pilate sensed something unusual. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked, his tone sharp, his Roman accent cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Jesus stood silent for a moment, eyes steady, neither fearful nor defensive. His face bore the wear of the long night, the blows, the spit, the mockery. Yet his silence carried more weight than the shouts of the mob outside. "You say so," he answered at last. His words were few, but they pressed against the air with unshakable calm. The chief priest erupted, voices rising, accusations spilling over one another. "He stirs up the people. He claims to be a king. He threatens the peace of Caesar's empire." Pilate raised a hand to silence them. He studied Jesus as if searching for guilt in his eyes. But what he saw unsettled him. Not rebellion, not pride, but a quiet authority that seemed to look through him. Inside the hall, Pilate's wife approached, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Have nothing to do with this righteous man," she whispered urgently, "for I have suffered much in a dream because of him." Pilate hesitated. Rome was a machine of law and order, but even governors listened when omens struck fear. He stepped outside to the crowd gathered in the courtyard, voices swelling like the tide. "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people," Pilate declared. "I have examined him before you, and I find no guilt in him." A murmur spread. Disbelief among the leaders, surprise among the bystanders. But the priests pressed harder, their voices sharpened with rage. "He stirs the people with his teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." At the mention of Galilee, Pilate seized an escape. Galilee belonged to Herod's jurisdiction. Let Herod deal with him. Pilate sent Jesus away, hoping to wash his hands of the matter. But Herod, curious more than concerned, mocked Jesus, draped him in a robe, and sent him back with disdain. Jesus, silent as before, endured it without protest. Pilate's plan had failed. Jesus stood once more in the Roman hall, and the crowd outside had grown louder, their chants swelling like a storm. "What shall I do with this man you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they roared, voices unrelenting. "Why? What evil has he done?" Pilate pleaded, his voice tinged with frustration. He was a governor caught between justice and the weight of politics, between what he saw in Jesus and the demands of the mob. Yet the cries only grew, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate looked to the basin of water set before him. He washed his hands, his face grim as though cleansing himself of a decision that no water could truly wash away. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "See to it yourselves." And yet, in yielding to their voices, he condemned him. The soldiers led Jesus away, preparing for the scourging that would precede the cross. The courtyard emptied into silence, the echoes of the mob fading into the distance. Pilate remained. The image of Jesus' steady gaze burned into his memory. A man condemned, yet strangely unbroken. The heavy wooden cross was laid upon Jesus' torn shoulders. The rough timber pressed against his raw wounds, each step dragging agony through his body. The Roman soldiers urged him forward, their shouts mingling with the murmurs of the crowd that lined the narrow streets of Jerusalem. The city alive with Passover pilgrims had become a stage for humiliation. Some jeered and mocked, others turned their faces away, unable to watch the suffering. Children clung to their mothers, their wide eyes filled with questions no parent dared to answer. Jesus stumbled, the crossbeam shifting as he fell hard upon the stones. Dust clung to his bloodied face. The soldiers cursed, yanking him upright. His body swayed, but his gaze did not falter. He looked not at the crowd, nor at the soldiers, but forward to the place that awaited him. Yet the weight was unbearable. A man pressed into the throng, Simon of Cyrene, was seized by the soldiers. They thrust the cross upon his back. Simon's hands trembled as he bore the burden, his eyes darting between fear and compassion. For a brief stretch of road, the innocent and the stranger were bound together by the same beam of suffering. Along the way, women of Jerusalem wept openly. Their cries cut through the harsh rhythm of the march. Jesus turned to them, his voice faint yet steady. "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" His words spoken in the midst of anguish lingered in the air, heavy with prophecy. The women's tears grew stronger, mingled with fear for what was to come. The soldiers pressed on their boots, striking in unison, iron weapons glinting under the sun. The road wound upward, the city falling behind them, until the place of execution came into view. Golgotha, the skull. The crowd followed still, some with curiosity, others with hatred, a few with broken hearts. Mary, his mother, walked silently, her soul pierced by the sight of her son's suffering. Beside her, John, the beloved disciple, remained steadfast. At the hilltop, the soldiers cast lots for his garments, the coarse voices of gambling men mocking the dignity of the moment. The cross was laid upon the ground, and preparations for crucifixion began. The long road had ended. The beam that had bruised his back would soon bear the weight of his body. The hill called Golgotha rose against the midday sky, barren and grim, its very name meaning the skull. Here the Romans carried out their harshest sentence, a place marked by death and cruelty. The soldiers moved with practiced ease. They laid the cross upon the rocky ground and forced Jesus down upon it. His body, already torn by scourging, shuddered at the cold hardness of the wood. Iron nails, heavy and merciless, were prepared. One soldier pressed his arm against the beam while another raised the hammer. The sound rang sharp, iron striking iron echoing across the hill. Flesh yielded and blood followed. The other hand was fastened. Then his feet, each blow another wound, another mark of agony. The cross was lifted. With a violent thrust, it fell into its socket in the earth. The weight of his body pulled against the nails, pain radiating through every nerve. Above his head, a sign had been fixed. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, written in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. It declared a title meant for mockery, yet true beyond their understanding. The crowd gathered, divided in their voices. Some laughed and scoffed. He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen one of God. Others stood in silence, their hearts heavy. Among them was Mary, his mother, who gazed at her son with sorrow beyond words. John stood beside her, steadfast even in this darkest hour. From the cross, Jesus spoke, his voice faint but clear. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The soldiers cast lots for his garments, fulfilling words spoken long before. They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my robe. 2 criminals were crucified alongside him, one on his right, the other on his left. One hurled insults, "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, his voice strained with the weight of death. "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we receive what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." And turning he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him with a promise that pierced through the agony. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The hours passed slowly. Darkness gathered over the land, though it was midday. The sun seemed to veil its face, and silence hung heavy upon the hill. The mocking voices grew quieter, unsettled by the unnatural shadow. At the foot of the cross, Jesus looked upon his mother and John. "Woman, behold your son," he said to her, and to John, "Behold your mother." From that hour the disciple took her into his own care. The minutes stretched into eternity. Every breath was labor, every word costly. Yet even in suffering, his words carried weight beyond measure. As the hours of suffering dragged on, the sky itself bore witness to what was unfolding. At about the 6th hour, around noon, darkness covered the whole land. It was not a passing cloud, nor an ordinary storm. It was as though creation itself mourned, shrouding the scene in grief, bearing testimony that this was no ordinary death. For 3 long hours, the sun refused to shine, as if heaven itself turned its face away. On the cross, Jesus endured agony beyond what the human body could bear. Yet his torment was deeper than physical pain. He carried the crushing weight of sin, not his own, for he was innocent, but the sin of the world. Every betrayal, every act of hatred, every thought of rebellion against God was laid upon him. The spotless Lamb of God bore it all. At the 9th hour, his voice broke through the darkness, crying out in deep anguish, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? It was not a loss of faith, but a window into the depth of his suffering. The eternal Son, in perfect unity with the Father, was now experiencing the horror of separation as he bore the penalty of humanity's sin. Some standing nearby misunderstood, thinking he was calling for Elijah. They hurried to offer him sour wine on a sponge, raised on a reed. But Jesus, after receiving it, lifted his voice once more. With his last breath, he declared, "It is finished." The work of redemption, foretold from the foundation of the world, was accomplished in that moment. Then, crying out loudly, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And with that he breathed his last. The very moment of his death, the earth trembled violently. Rocks split, graves opened, and the great curtain of the temple, thick and heavy, separating the holy place from the most holy place, was torn in two from top to bottom. No human hands did this. It was God himself declaring that through Jesus' sacrifice, the barrier between him and mankind had been destroyed. Access to his presence was now open, not through rituals or sacrifices, but through the blood of the Son. The Roman centurion, hardened by countless executions, stood in awe. Having witnessed the manner of his death and the signs surrounding it, he confessed with trembling lips, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Many of those who had mocked him now stood silent, struck with fear. Others who had followed him from Galilee, including women who had ministered to him, watched from a distance, their hearts breaking as they realized the weight of what had happened. In those hours of darkness and death, it seemed the story was over. To the disciples, hope lay buried with him. To his enemies, it seemed victory was won. But in reality, the greatest victory in all of history had just been accomplished, not seen yet with human eyes, but secured forever in the unseen realm. As the shadows lengthened and the Sabbath drew near, the urgency of what to do with Jesus' body pressed heavily upon his followers. According to Jewish law, the bodies of the condemned could not remain on the cross overnight, especially not on the Sabbath. And this was no ordinary Sabbath, but the Passover itself, the holiest of days. The chief priests, wanting to ensure the crucifixion was finalized before sunset, asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified broken, hastening their death. The soldiers went to the two criminals beside Jesus and shattered their legs. But when they came to him, they saw he was already dead. Instead of breaking his bones, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out, clear evidence of his death. Unknowingly, they fulfilled the scripture. Not one of his bones will be broken, and they will look on the one they have pierced. Amid the fear and confusion of the disciples, two unexpected men stepped forward. Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council who had not consented to Jesus' condemnation, went boldly to Pilate to ask for his body. This was no small act. It risked his reputation, his standing, and even his safety. But in the moment of Jesus' death, Joseph's faith, once hidden, came into the open. Alongside him came Nicodemus, the same Pharisee who had once visited Jesus in the secrecy of night, asking about being born again. He now emerged from the shadows, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes nearly 75 pounds in weight to honor the body of the Lord. The timid seeker had become a bold servant, giving to Jesus in death what he had not dared in life. Together, Joseph and Nicodemus carefully took down his body. They wrapped him in clean linen cloths, folding strips around him with the spices according to Jewish burial customs. With reverence and sorrow, they prepared him as best they could before the Sabbath rest began. Nearby, Joseph had a new tomb carved out of solid rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was close to Golgotha, and so they placed Jesus there. With solemn strength, they rolled a great stone across the entrance, sealing it shut. The women who had followed him from Galilee, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and others, watched carefully, noting where he was laid. Their hearts were pierced with grief, yet they resolved to return after the Sabbath to anoint his body with more spices and oil. Meanwhile, the chief priests and Pharisees, remembering Jesus' words that he would rise again after 3 days, went to Pilate once more. They requested that the tomb be made secure, fearing his disciples might steal the body and claim he had risen. Pilate, weary of them, yet unwilling to risk disturbance, granted their request. A guard was set, and the stone was sealed with the mark of Rome, and so, as the Sabbath began, silence fell. The teacher who had healed the sick, raised the dead, calmed storms, and spoken with authority greater than any man now lay motionless in a borrowed tomb. To the world, it seemed the light had gone out, the hope extinguished, and the kingdom he promised lost forever. Yet hidden within the stillness of that sealed grave was the greatest mystery. Death itself had been challenged. The one who lay within had not been conquered. He was waiting. The Sabbath passed in deep sorrow. Jerusalem lay hushed, its streets empty, its people resting according to the law. Yet in the hearts of those who had followed Jesus, rest could not be found. The disciples hid in fear, uncertain of their future. The women prepared spices and perfumes, waiting for the first light of the new week to finish what love compelled them to do. And then dawn broke on the first day, very early as the sky turned pale and the dew still clung to the earth. Mary Magdalene and the other women set out for the tomb. Their hearts were heavy and their hands carried the spices of mourning. They whispered among themselves, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance?" For they knew it was large, sealed and guarded. But as they approached, a great trembling shook the ground. An angel of the Lord descended from heaven, his appearance like lightning, and his garments white as snow. He rolled back the stone, not to let Jesus out, but to reveal to the world what had already happened. The guards, overcome with terror, shook and fell as if dead men. The women stood frozen, their sorrow colliding with fear and awe. The angel spoke with words that pierced the silence of centuries. "Do not be afraid. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him." They entered the tomb, trembling, and found the linen strips lying there, the cloth that had covered his head folded neatly by itself. The grave was empty, not because of theft, not because of trickery, but because death itself had lost its grip. Mary Magdalene, distraught and confused, lingered behind as the others ran to tell the disciples. She wept outside the tomb, her tears blurring her sight. Turning, she saw a man standing there, but did not recognize him. Thinking he was the gardener, she pleaded, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go to him." Then he spoke her name, Mary. At once her eyes were opened, and she knew it was Jesus, alive, risen, glorious. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed with joy and awe. But Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary ran, her sorrow transformed into uncontainable hope. She burst into the room where the disciples hid and declared the words that would echo through eternity. "I have seen the Lord." That evening, the disciples gathered in fear behind locked doors. Suddenly, without sound or warning, Jesus himself stood among them. "Peace be with you," he said, showing them his hands and side. Their fear dissolved into astonishment and joy as they realized the truth. Their master lived. Not all believed at first. Thomas, absent that night, refused their testimony. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and my hand into his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, Jesus appeared again. This time, Thomas was there. Jesus turned to him, inviting him gently yet firmly. "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Overwhelmed, Thomas fell before him, exclaiming, "My Lord and my God." Jesus replied, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." For 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciples and many others, teaching them, opening the scriptures, and preparing them for the mission that would change the world. What had begun with fear and despair was now overflowing with unstoppable courage. The grave had been broken. Death had been undone. The risen Christ stood as proof that sin was conquered, prophecy fulfilled, and hope secured for all generations. The resurrection was not merely the end of the story. It was the beginning of all things new. Thus, Jesus' journey, which began with love and left an indelible mark on human history, came to an end. We learned that the legacy of mercy he left behind is still a compass for millions of people today. This life is the epic of goodness, standing firm against hatred. After learning the details of this spiritual life, take care of yourselves until our next spiritual journey.